For years the rumors refused to die. They appeared in tabloids, on television, across the internet, and eventually in courtrooms. Some people claimed a secret had been hidden inside the Jackson family for decades. Others believed the truth had been buried beneath fame, money, and one of the most powerful legacies in entertainment history. Most dismissed those claims as gossip, until DNA entered the conversation. Because rumors can be ignored. Photographs can be debated, witnesses can be questioned. But DNA is different. DNA doesn't care about celebrity. It doesn't care about public opinion. And it doesn't care about family secrets. It only tells one story, the truth. What made this situation so explosive was the family involved. This wasn't an ordinary family. This was the Jackson family. A family whose name became known in nearly every country on earth. A family whose success changed music forever. And a family that spent decades under a microscope. Every decision was analyzed. Every appearance was discussed. Every rumor became a headline. But some rumors never disappeared. Instead they grew, year after year, decade after decade, until questions about identity, parentage, and biological connections became some of the most debated topics surrounding the family. Questions many believed would never be answered. Then came the possibility of DNA evidence, and suddenly everything changed. Because once DNA becomes part of a story, speculation is no longer enough. People want answers, real answers, the kind that can either destroy a rumor forever or confirm it. And in the Jackson family's case, millions wanted to know the same thing. Had the public been told the full truth all along? Or was there something hidden beneath decades of headlines? The story would eventually pull investigators, lawyers, journalists, family members, and the media into a controversy that few expected. A controversy involving identity, legacy, and one of the most famous families in modern history. But to understand why DNA became such a powerful part of the story, we have to go back. Back before the rumors. Back before the lawsuits. Back before the internet turned every theory into a global debate. Back to the beginning. Because long before DNA tests and public speculation, the Jackson family was already living a life unlike any other. And the pressure that came with that fame would eventually create that refused to disappear. By the time the Jackson family became a global phenomenon, privacy had already become a luxury they could no longer afford. The world wanted access, not just to their music, not just to their performances, to their lives. The more famous they became, the more intense the curiosity grew. And curiosity eventually turned into scrutiny. Every interview was analyzed. Every family photograph was examined. Every public appearance sparked new discussions. For most celebrities, that level of attention would be overwhelming. For the Jackson family it became normal, at least on the surface. Behind the scenes, however, the constant attention created something else: suspicion, questions, and sometimes accusations as the years passed. Rumors surrounding the family evolved. The early stories focused on success. Then came stories of conflict. Then came stories about money. And eventually, stories about identity. Some claims appeared briefly before disappearing. Others survived for years. A few became so widespread that millions of people accepted them as facts without ever seeing evidence. That was the strange power of celebrity culture. A rumor repeated enough times could begin to feel true, even when nobody could prove it. Then the internet arrived, and everything changed. Information moved faster than ever before. So did misinformation. Old stories resurfaced. New theories emerged. Online forums became filled with people trying to solve mysteries they believed the public had never fully understood. Some compared family photographs. Others searched through decades of interviews. Many believed they could find hidden clues in plain sight. The discussions grew larger every year. And eventually, those discussions started focusing on one question. Could DNA provide answers that decades of speculation never could? For some people the answer seemed obvious, yes. But obtaining those answers was never simple. Especially when the family involved was one of the most recognizable families in the world. The stakes were enormous, not only emotionally, but financially, legally, and historically. Because any major revelation connected to the Jackson family would instantly become international news. That reality attracted attention from all directions. Journalists wanted answers, media outlets wanted exclusives, and individuals claiming connections to the family wanted recognition. Some of those claims attracted little attention. Others exploded into headlines. Each time it happened, the same pattern repeated. A claim would appear. News organizations would report it. Social media would react. Then everyone would ask the same question: where is the proof? For years, proof remained elusive. But the conversations continued. And they continued for one reason. The Jackson name carried extraordinary weight. People weren't simply discussing biology. They were discussing legacy. One of the most valuable legacies in entertainment history. That made every claim more controversial. And every unanswered question more powerful. Meanwhile, another factor complicated everything: public perception. For decades, millions of people felt they knew the Jackson family. They had watched them grow up, watched them perform, watched them dominate the music industry. But public familiarity can create an illusion. People often believe they know public figures personally, even when they don't. That illusion fueled countless theories, many of which spread far beyond the evidence available. Yet despite all the speculation, one reality remained impossible to ignore. DNA had transformed modern investigations. It had solved cold cases, identified unknown victims, resolved family disputes, and answered questions that had remained unanswered for decades. People knew what DNA was capable of, which made the public's fascination even stronger. Because if DNA could solve mysteries everywhere else, why not here? Why not within one of the most famous families in history? The possibility alone kept the story alive. Then something interesting began to happen. This conversation shifted. Instead of focusing on rumors themselves, people began focusing on verification. Verification meant evidence. Evidence meant testing. And testing meant answers, at least in theory. But answers are not always welcome. Sometimes they create closure, sometimes they create conflict, and sometimes they create entirely new questions. The Jackson family understood that reality better than most. Because every new controversy generated headlines around the world. And every headline brought renewed attention. Some family members chose silence, others publicly addressed claims. A few strongly denied them. The result was a complicated landscape filled with competing narratives. The public watched from a distance, trying to determine who was right, trying to determine what was true, trying to determine whether DNA would finally settle questions that had lingered for years. Then came a development that intensified everything. Individuals connected to various claims began publicly calling for proof, not speculation, not rumors, proof. The demand was simple. If the claims were true, evidence should exist. If they were false, evidence could expose them. It sounded straightforward. But in reality, nothing about the situation was straightforward. Because family disputes are rarely simple. And when those disputes involve global celebrities, they become even more complicated. The media quickly recognized the potential. Coverage expanded. Interviews followed. Commentators weighed in, experts were consulted, and once again, the Jackson family found itself at the center of a growing controversy. A controversy that showed no signs of disappearing. As public interest intensified, discussions about DNA moved from internet forums into mainstream conversations. Millions of people were now paying attention, waiting, watching, and wondering what might happen next. Because beneath all the speculation was a question nobody seemed able to answer. What would happen if definitive evidence finally emerged? Would it end decades of rumors? Would it confirm long-standing theories? Or would it reveal something nobody expected? The answer remained unclear. But one thing was becoming obvious. The story was approaching a turning point. And the people closest to the situation knew it. Because behind the headlines, behind the interviews, and behind the endless public debate, conversations were taking place that could have lasting consequences. Not only for individuals, but for the Jackson legacy itself. The next chapter would bring the controversy closer to a breaking point. And for the first time, the possibility of obtaining real answers would begin to feel very real. The question was no longer whether people wanted the truth. The question was whether the truth was about to emerge. As the years passed, something unexpected happened. The rumors did not disappear. They multiplied. Every new interview seemed to create another theory. Every old photograph inspired another debate. Every public statement generated fresh speculation. And at the center of it all was a question that refused to die. What if DNA could answer everything? For some people, that possibility became an obsession. Online communities spent years comparing photographs, comparing facial features, comparing childhood images, comparing family timelines. Some believed they were uncovering hidden truths. Others believed they were chasing shadows. But the discussions never stopped. Because the Jackson family occupied a unique place in popular culture. They were not simply celebrities. They were a global phenomenon. Entire generations had grown up watching them, listening to their music, following their lives. And when people become that invested in public figures, curiosity often evolves into something deeper. The desire to know everything, even things that may never have been hidden in the first place. As DNA technology became more advanced, public expectations grew. People watched cold cases get solved decades later. Unknown identities were suddenly revealed. Long-lost relatives were reunited. Mysteries that once seemed impossible to solve suddenly had answers. The public began to wonder, could the same thing happen here? Could DNA finally settle decades of speculation surrounding the Jackson family? For a moment, it seemed possible. Claims surfaced, headlines appeared, stories spread rapidly across the internet, videos attracted millions of views, forums exploded with discussion. And once again the same cycle repeated itself. A rumor would emerge, people would demand proof, the media would react. Then the story would slowly fade, only to return again months later, or years later. The pattern became strangely familiar. And perhaps that was the real story. Not the rumors themselves, but the fact that they never seemed to end. Because with every passing year, something became increasingly clear. The fascination was no longer driven by evidence, it was driven by mystery. People wanted answers, but they were also captivated by the search itself. The possibility, the uncertainty, the belief that somewhere, hidden beneath decades of headlines, there was one final truth waiting to be discovered. Yet despite countless discussions, interviews, investigations and theories, no single DNA revelation ever arrived to transform everything overnight. No dramatic moment, no shocking announcement, no secret document suddenly appearing and changing history. Reality was far more complicated than that, and perhaps far more interesting, because the longer people searched, the more they discovered something unexpected. The Jackson family had become larger than the facts themselves. Their story had evolved into a cultural phenomenon, part history, part entertainment, part mystery. The questions survived because the family remained fascinated, not because every question had an answer. Think about it. Decades after the Jackson family's rise to fame, people are still discussing it, still analyzing interviews, still examining
Well, the
photos,
rules that was
still revisiting stories from years ago. That level of fascination is rare, very rare. Most celebrities eventually fade from public conversation. The Jackson family never truly did. Especially after the death of Michael Jackson in 2009, the loss reignited worldwide interest. Fans revisited old interviews, old performances, old stories, and old questions. Some people searched for closure, others searched for answers. Many searched for both. But closure and answers are not always the same thing. Sometimes an answer creates more questions. Sometimes a mystery survives because no answer ever feels complete. And that may explain why discussions surrounding DNA continued long after many expected them to disappear. Because DNA represented certainty. And certainty is powerful, especially in a world filled with speculation.
By donating the $1.5 million settlement from Pepsi to the Brotman Medical Center's burn unit, a characteristically generous act, Michael symbolically distanced himself from the commercial machinery that nearly cost him his life.
One answer, but history rarely works that way. Instead, the story became
It was meant to be the biggest tour the world had ever seen, a victory like no other. 6 brothers returning to the stage one last time to remind.
Perhaps that is why the fascination continues today. Not because people are searching for scandal, not because they are searching for controversy, but because they are searching for understanding. Trying to understand how one family became one of the most recognized families in history. Trying to understand the pressures they faced, the attention they endured, and the myths that grew around them. In the end, DNA did not become the dramatic final chapter many expected. Instead, it became a symbol of the public's desire for certainty, a symbol of humanity's endless search for answers, and a symbol of how powerful curiosity can become when it is attached to one of the most famous families the world has ever known. For years, people believed DNA might reveal a secret capable of changing everything. But perhaps the real revelation was something else entirely. The realization that some stories endure not because of what we know, but because of what we continue wondering about.
Could never get to him. I tried all I could, and I could never get to him because I was barred away from him by securities and all that type of
mystery. The fascination continued.